record.
All right. Thank you guys so much. It's a very big day for me, very special day. We are here talking with John David Ebert, an author, a cultural critic. He has written many, many books. He has a new novel trilogy coming out, Every Angel is Terrifying. He also wrote one of my favorite books, The New Media Invasion. He is someone who has introduced me and sort of unofficially guided me through many of the great thinkers and opened my world up to people I had never heard of. So John, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and coming to talk to me about Gebser and all this other stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Justin. It's always a blast with you.
Thank you. All right, so I did say we wanted to talk Gebser because that's what my YouTube channel is kind of going through. So my first question is, why do you think Jean Gebser the name doesn't carry the same popularity or weight as someone like a Heidegger or a Nietzsche? Why do you think he goes under the radar?
Part of it is his own fault, which is to say that he wasn't an academic. Like myself, like Joseph Campbell, none of us liked academia. Nietzsche is another one, Spangler's another one. Spangler chose to teach high school rather than have academic colleagues who would just be jealous of him. Anyway, so these guys are deliberately putting themselves outside the system, outside the European mainstream. And Gebser was a rebel anyway. He specifically was a rebel against the Jungian world, even though he taught psychology in Zurich, in that very world. He was a part of it, but um, he was a rebel against Jung, and also he's rebelling against Oswald Spengler as well. And he's basically, though, trying to take both of their worldviews and synthesize them in such a way that it will be something new. And that's exactly what happened. It's a totally fresh set of ideas with the ever-present origin. Um, it was obviously academics in America, Noel Barstead and Algis McCuna, thought that it was important enough to get it translated into English. So far, it's the only one of his books that's been translated. I wish they would translate others because it's amazing stuff. And Gebser was just a guy that I encountered first day last year of college. Bill Moyers is interviewing Joseph Campbell. Up to that point, I've been writing fiction all my life, from age of 7 all the way up into college and beyond, actually. And but at that point, when I was listening to him talk, I'd never heard anybody talk like that. And I couldn't really understand what the fuck he was saying, but I knew I had to understand it. It became an emergency situation. Really, it was that I was like, there's something here that I have to know what he knows because he knows it so well. So I got The Hero with a Thousand Faces, read that. It was one of the first nonfiction books I ever read, actually. Blew me away. Then read The Masks of God. And then he keeps referencing these two guys, Carl Jung and Oswald Spengler. Who are these two guys? So I go to the college campus library, a very good library at Arizona State University, actually. They had every book I ever wanted in that library. It was so huge. And I got Spengler off the shelf, looked at it, unfolded the charts. I was like, same thing. I need to understand what's in this book. So I spent the next couple of years reading through Jung and Spengler so that I could make more sense out of Joseph Campbell, then read through all of Joseph Campbell's works. And then I knew them so well that he had died right about the time I was getting interested in him in 1986. I was in college then. So I never got to meet him. I did meet his wife. And I had heard that there was this thing called the Joseph Campbell Foundation that was devoting themselves to publishing his posthumous writings. And I asked them a letter just randomly. I knew all of Campbell's books. Would they have any interest in me helping them edit these books? And then I forgot about it. A year went by before I got a reply that came back and said, actually, yeah, we could use your help. We're publishing his travel diaries from when he went to India in the 1950s and Japan. It'll be 2 volumes. Are you interested? I said, oh, yes, I'm interested. So I spent the next couple of 5 years, actually, one of the best jobs I ever had, because I got to work from home, putting footnotes, my own words, into Joseph Campbell books. And when the first book came back and I saw my name in it, just as an acknowledgments, I was thrilled. I was like, I'm in a Joseph Campbell book. That's impossible. Come on now. And now I was floored. I was totally blown away. So meanwhile, one of the guys at Joseph Campbell Foundation, who was a personal friend of Campbell when he was alive, the architect John LaBelle, professor of architecture at Pratt in New York, said, you'd probably like William Irwin Thompson too, because he does very similar things with myth, only he's more interested in myth and science because he likes them both, whereas Campbell had no interest in science. So I did. I took his advice and I read The Time Falling Bodies Take to Light. Blew me away, and all over again. His books, just same level of erudition and knowledge and articulation as Campbell. Same thing. Only this guy's alive. I was like, I got to track this guy down. I need to talk to him. Like you guys have been doing with me, what
Yeah,
comes
yeah.
around goes around eventually. So, so I sought him out and I made the mistake though. I got his phone number from John and I called him up directly. I was really nervous, just a cold call. And I told him to give me some credibility because I didn't have any academic credibility or anything like that or anything published. So I said, I'm working with the Joseph Campbell Foundation and I would like to interview you. Wrong words, because he's got a complex about Campbell. He's either jealous or envious or whatever. And I just get this blast in my ear. Joseph Campbell stopped reading books after 1945. He never read Jean Gebser. He never read Rudolf Steiner. He never read Marshall McLuhan. And I'm like, who are these guys? So it's like with Campbell and Young and Spengler all over again. Time to go to the library.
Mhm.
Hung up, go to the library, dig out the ever-present origin. I'm looking at it, and it's another Spengler guy. Equal erudition, equal perceptiveness about culture and how cultural morphology works. And I was blown away. And more charts, just like Spengler, for me to chew on. So I then spent the next few years reading and studying those three guys and realizing that Thompson rescued me from being a Jungian and getting stuck in the world of Jungian psychology and just living in another man's mind. He helped me get out of Joseph Campbell's head into another cosmos entirely, where reincarnation and karma are now part of the paradigm. Thompson fully accepts and embraces it, even though he regards himself as Christian, technically Irish Christian, but nonetheless, the belief system has read Rudolf Steiner and metabolized him. So this is another worldview. Now I'm in another guy's head. So he becomes my mentor for the next 15 years. He wrote the foreword to my second book, Celluloid Heroes and Mechanical Dragons. The guy's just amazing. It's too bad he's been mostly forgotten about in American letters. Hopefully that will change because he was a very talented man. He was an academic. He went through the academic system, got his PhD, and then went and taught English at MIT to a bunch of tech heads, which was a grueling experience for him. So he left academe at that point. That's it for him in academe. And he founds his own institution called Lindisfarne, named after one of the monasteries, the first one that was sacked by the Vikings, because the Irish were preserving culture. They alone saved civilization, as Thomas Cale's book says. And so he figured we're living in a dark age now of dysliteracy. It's a similar period. We're like monks shepherding being here at Lindisfarne. And so what he would do is he would go to various venues like the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York would host him a lot. And they would bring in Buddhist monks and astronauts, tech guys, scientist guys, Sufi mystics, and get them talking. The right brain and the left brain, basically, get them talking. And so I thought that all of that was intoxicating, that scientists would take spirituality seriously, and here's a venue for it. And so I wrote that book with him in mind. There's a lot of his vocabulary in Celluloid Heroes. And when I sent him the book, he said, wow, I've invaded your mind like a psychic invasion. I said, yeah, that's pretty much true, Bill. So it was another 5 years before I published my next book. I'm 40. I'm getting divorced, nearing the end of my relationship with Thompson because I'm realizing I don't need him anymore. I've outgrown my mentor. I've got my own voice and my own worldview now. I've mostly flushed him out of my head. There are areas that I want to investigate that Thompson never went into, like hardcore philosophy. He claims in a footnote in Pacific Shift that he was reading Heidegger and he couldn't understand a word of it. So threw the Being and Time against the wall. He says it's a monumental failure. No, Bill, you did not sit down and use that brain of yours, which you have, to understand Martin Heidegger and find out why he's the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, or at least that's his reputation. And it's more or less true. So that's the whole story of how I came to these guys, found my own way, and entered into the field of critical theory as an American theoretician and writing, I don't know, 20 or 25 books, nonfiction critical theory on various aspects of cinema, the arts, graphic novels. I take pop culture seriously just as much as I take top culture seriously. And so that's the whole story, how it unfolded. So I hope I
Okay, yeah,
answered your
that's
question. I
interesting.
probably over answered it.
No, it's okay. No, I love hearing you over. That's why I have you on, John, to hear you over answer.
That's good to know. That's
Um,
good to know.
but between you, Spengler, and Gebser, it is interesting that I've noticed that some great thinkers do stay beyond academia. It seems to avoid the bureaucracy and specialization. It seems to be
That's
what.
right. It's not for everyone. Some guys can make it work, like Heidegger did. He remained an academic. So did Marshall McLuhan. They probably had a lot of jealous peers, but
Right.
in fact, I know they did because I just read in the Heidegger biography the other day. I was reading about his early days in academia, where he was a Catholic and he was basically studying Catholic philosophy and so forth for a very long time. He remained a Catholic up until like about age 30 or so, and he kept trying to get these high appointments that in the school that other people he knew were jealous of him and shoved him out and intercepted the appointments. So that probably went on all his life.
Okay.
And with McLuhan as well. So some guys can tolerate it though.
All
Some
right.
no thanks.
Interesting.
I knew in
You,
my case it would just be nothing but a fight. And I know from my few brushes with academia that that's exactly what it would have been. Like when I sent my paper about Gilgamesh to the Journal of Near Eastern Studies, which I think comes out of University of Chicago, which is the center of archaeological learning. I don't know if it still is, but it was back in the 90s still when I was writing. I figured out that the Gilgamesh epic is it's an astronomical journey through the zodiac. It's pretty obvious, actually, once you sit down with it. All the scholars recognize the bull as Taurus, but they don't seem to recognize the other constellations. And I was learning Babylonian astrology, so I knew what the constellations were, and they're all in that epic, every single one of them. So it's really a journey about a man going, just like Heracles, through the 12 labors, it was an echo of Gilgamesh, going through the 12 signs of the zodiac. So I write the paper, I send it to the Journal of Near Eastern Studies. Here's the official academic response. I get the email, and they say, well, the problem with your thesis, Mr. Ebert, is that the Babylonians didn't have astronomy until the Mullipen tablets, which date from 1000 BC. So they had no astronomy before that. And the Gilgamesh epic dates from the time of Hammurabi, 1790 BC, the first version of it. And I didn't bother responding, but here's my response. You see, when a tradition is committed to writing, it's already been around for a long, long time. They're about to lose it. That's why they're committing it to writing, so they don't lose it. But you're an academic. You can't think for yourself. You're not allowed to. And the reason for that is that they're afraid of being wrong. And if they have the wrong interpretation, they'll be ridiculed and they'll lose tenure. So that's the problem with academia. You're really stuck in a box. Your freedoms, your intellectual freedoms are very, very limited. And I know this from the fellow Professor Brandon Van Dyke from Lafayette College, a very prestigious college. He invited me out because he was able, while being an academic, he's young, he's in his mid 30s and trying to get tenure. And so I flew out to Pittsburgh, and I gave the talk at the university because he was trying to create a series of thinkers who think outside the box and then invite them in. Camille Paglia had already been there. Jordan Peterson had already been there. Here's John David Ebert, this weird guy from all the way out in the American Southwest. What does he have to say about Spengler? So I gave a talk on Spengler. Everybody loved it.
I've seen that talk. I like that
Yeah,
talk a lot.
yeah. Uh, I'm a little overweight there. I'm on a keto diet. I promise. I've lost 68 pounds since then. I look much more acceptable socially.
Just don't look at pictures from my
That's the
cousin's
only thing.
wedding.
Yeah, that's why I can't look at the video.
That's right.
I look like I'm pregnant or something. Believe me, I've made progress.
All
So
that knowledge has to go somewhere,
yeah,
John.
that's true. And so what happened was then he did a series of interviews with me and posted them on YouTube. But he would send me the video, and then more than once, at least 2 or 3 times he did this. He said, wait, don't put that up. I have to edit out this comment that I said that might get me in trouble. And I'm like, okay, I'll take it down. He does the delete. I put it back up because he's trying to get tenure. So he has to be careful. He has to walk on eggshells with every single thing he says. Why would you want to live that way? Well, I can tell you why from experience, because you're taken care of and you're not stuck with poverty in most cases, as I have been all my life. So I've paid the price. But you got to make choices in life. If you want to make one thing flower, then you've got to take from somewhere else and sacrifice in order to make the flower bloom. Life feeds on blood. This is the Aztec worldview right here. Water the ground with blood and flowers will come up. It's a perfect metaphor for what I've done with my career.
Yeah.
It's working out. It's stuff's coming my way now that's never happened before.
Well,
So
I'm glad
it's
you
a
did it because
very,
I
very
wouldn't.
exciting period of my life here.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did it. I wouldn't have found you otherwise. So I don't think at
Yeah,
least maybe,
thank
but
you for that. I'm
um,
glad that you're having me on here. All
no,
right,
yeah, trying to get the word out. When I found you, it was funny. I read Blood Meridian, and I was
great novel.
obsessed. Yeah, I was obsessed with hearing interpretations. And then when
Yeah,
I
I did a
found you,
series on it. Yeah,
when I did yours, it was like Christmas. This guy, and it's kind of what you said about Joseph Campbell, where he said, "I don't really know what he's saying, but I have to know." And then I was like, "Well, he's got a
yeah,
course, might as well, right?" And then there you
yeah.
go.
Yeah, I
Um,
did that as though one of those guys. I was imagining what would Joseph Campbell say about Blood Meridian if he
yeah,
read it and loved it, or what would Bill Thompson say about it? Thompson had some sort of allergy against McCarthy because he makes off the cuff comments about McCarthy's ignorant cowboys. So he didn't get the point. He didn't understand
Hmm.
McCarthy at all. There's no such thing in a McCarthy book. They are not ignorant, or if they are, it's there for a reason. Like in Blood Meridian,
Yeah,
it's there for a reason. The kid is ignorant for a reason. It's a novel with no morality in it whatsoever, which is why it'll probably never be successfully made as a film because everybody wants the cowboys to represent good, and the Native Americans and the Mexicans and the bandits are evil.
yep,
McCarthy doesn't do that shit. It's way too sophisticated. It's an example of taking, like Andy Warhol did in The Pop Artist, where you take a medium like comics and then you transform it into art by moving it up to the highbrow realm. And now you're looking at comics through Roy Lichtenstein's paintings, blow ups of comics. Now it's art. So he's
yeah.
doing the same thing with the pop art genre of the cowboy narrative and elevating it to the level of highbrow literature. And it's a different experience completely. You will never think of cowboys the same way again. And he's much more compassionate on his characters with the Border trilogy. They're much more interesting, fully three-dimensional characters. But I'm in awe of McCarthy. He's one of my all-time
Do you
great.
hear about well, first of all, it's interesting that he would be, I guess, derisive towards cowboys because you inspired me to pick up Great American Replacement of Nature. Now, I won't lie, about 150 pages, it lost me. But
Okay.
he does throughout the whole book, it does seem to he seems upset that we're replacing nature. Well, cowboys seem to be a little closer to nature than whatever
Yeah,
we have now. So it's
exactly.
interesting that he
More
would,
rustic.
yeah,
He would he would like Blood
yeah,
Meridian. There's no way he couldn't. If he would just set aside his prejudices and sit down with it, I know he would have loved it.
yeah,
Thompson was a highbrow literature guy. He
yeah,
loved Gravity's Rainbow.
hmm
And I've known highbrow literature guys who think it's garbage.
yeah,
I got into a tangle with one of these guys whom was very sophisticated, cultured. I was in my 30s. He was in his 60s in San Francisco. Very neat guy, very interesting. But he couldn't understand Gravity's Rainbow. He's like, come on, that's silly. It's trash. And I said, no, you didn't understand this, that,
yeah.
the philosophical, mythological, hermetic references. You have to see what he's doing. He didn't get it. So it does happen, you know.
It
Everyone's
happens.
got their own tastes.
That's
I've been
right.
told that David Foster Wallace, Infinite Jest, is something I should investigate by people whose literary opinions I respect. So I will at some point.
I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. That's a very polarized, like
Have you
controversial.
read it?
I have not, no.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
I
I've
have
I've
not.
got the guys in the Spengler group were telling me this last week. You have to read Infinite Jest. Okay, and also House of Leaves by Danielewski. Have you read that? Yeah, my prejudice was when I was working at a bookstore in the 90s or early 2000s when it came out. And it just looks like a bunch of gimmicks as you flip through it. He does all these weird things with the prose and everything. It looks gimmicky. But a guy whose opinion, more than one guy, whose opinions I respect, said, no, it's not. It's very emotional and there's a lot, it's very intense and there's a lot going on in there that you would like, Mr. Ebert. So I've got those two that I need to dive into at some point and find out what.
Well, I want to get into Gebser soon, but since we're on McCarthy, did you hear the recent news about him?
No,
You didn't.
do tell.
So, of course, Cormac has been a notorious hermit his whole life. There
I
was a
saw him once.
You saw him once,
Yep,
really?
shortly
Okay.
after I moved up here, and he was one
What?
of the reasons why I moved up here. I wanted to be in the town where I knew I might encounter him, and I did indeed. I was working at the mall, the De Vargas Mall in Santa Fe, which is what he frequents on a regular basis. And the manager in there advised me, don't approach him, whatever you do. He does not like to talk to people. He's pleasantly unpleasant, is what I've been told. So I'm like, okay, don't need to go near him. So I'm taking a nap in my car right in front of the mall. Just as I'm waking up, there he goes, walking right past me, motherfucking Cormac McCarthy, one of the greatest writers in
I
the
know that's awesome.
American. Yeah, blew me away, and I was good with that. That's it. I had the sighting about 2 years before he died. So
Tell me he wasn't holding hands with some little girl
he,
because
he was by
apparently
himself. He had, I think, books with him.
well,
Um,
he got in trouble because apparently some woman now came forward and said back in 1967, 69, somewhere around there, she was his muse, and she said she was 17 while he was in his 40s, which isn't great, but I guess you can
you
kind of. But it turns out later on she was actually 13. Um,
Well, here's what I'll say about that.
so.
That's a cultural prejudice. It's not a biological fact
Mhm.
because examples, Poe marrying his 13-year-old cousin, that's a commonly known example, but even more so, the great painter Peter Paul Rubens, Rembrandt's rival, at age 54, I believe, married a 16-year-old girl and had a very happy family with her. So these are just social biases. They have no meaning whatsoever. Women mature way more quickly than men do. That's a known fact. They're already having a mature worldview as early as 13. They can, and they make fun of boys. I remember that the girls would make fun of us for being idiots, which we were.
Yeah.
Guys will be guys all the way well up into their 20s. They'll be just idiots, and the women know that. That's why those women who do prefer older women, older men or older women, whatever your orientation is. That's why they prefer older men. Because
Yeah.
when I met Mary Church, I was 48 and she was 23. Not quite as dramatic an age gap, but it caused a
Yeah.
bit of some of the problems in the relationship, but not really. We kind of overrode all of that.
Mhm.
We enjoyed the pleasure of each other's company, regardless of the age gap. It worried her a little at first until I started showing her all the examples, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I guess it's not. All
Mhm.
these artists and thinkers do these kinds of taboo relationship.
Right.
I guess we're in the same category. So
Right.
an
Right.
artist and a philosopher,
Yes.
yeah, that'll work.
You do nonfiction, he does fiction,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Exactly
All
right.
right. So one thing from Gebser that has really impacted me, and I've kind of taken it upon myself, is to kill rationalism. And my question to you is, rationalism, we should be clear for anyone who watching doesn't know, is the idea that whatever can be considered true by means of rational thought is exclusively true. It outprivileges any other way of producing some sort of truth. Do you think rationalism is a problem in 2025? Because I got a whole list of things. And if so, how does
Yeah,
that manifest?
you can make it a problem if you take, and what here's the whole thing Gebser is trying to solve is that rationality works. You get results from it. You can do math, you can do logic, you can make rockets, you can get the correct paradigm with all the planets. They were all in the wrong place in the old paradigm. So now we've got the correct paradigm. Um, so it has its place as long as it knows that it's only valid for
Right.
those places. The physical plane is what it understands. It
Mhm.
wasn't built to understand the earlier consciousness structures, the magical and the mythical, whereas the magical is tuned into the astral plane via shamans. Shamans have the ability to do what Robert Monroe figured out on his own astral traveling just back in the 1950s and 60s when he pioneered astral traveling because he perfected it. So it's real. So the shamans are interacting with the astral plane. It's a different realm with different laws and rules that have nothing to do with rationality. It won't work over there because there is no time, there is no space, and there is no causality over there. And those are the things that the rational mind needs to have its little Kantian box of space, time, and causality, and nothing can violate it. Well, guess what? You're only talking about one stratum of the
Yep.
universe, the physical. There are infinite strata above it of all kinds of different laws, different dimensions, different beings. This is just the lowest, heaviest, and most dense of a universe that is absolutely infinite,
Mhm.
one layer after the next of different creatures, beings. Robert Monroe went at one point, as he's recounting in his trilogy, he did 3 of these books. He wanted to find an intelligence that was non-human. So he could talk to something that was at least as smart as human beings. But he said he found a bias that they wouldn't talk to him because they regard humans as the way we regard insects.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
Yeah, but what does that tell you about what's out there
Yeah.
and how little we know?
Yeah.
Uh, if they're condescending toward us, we've got a long way to go here in the knowledge
Yeah.
widening
Yeah.
that with these little monkey brains that were designed to get food, sex, and shelter.
Mhm.
Pretty good at doing that,
Yeah.
actually. We've gotten pretty good at that.
Mhm.
It wasn't designed to understand the spiritual, subtle world. For that, we have our artists. We have our David Lynch's,
Right.
our Mary Churches, whose imagination is very similar to Lynch's, who have a feel for all things astral. If I'm watching back through all of David Lynch since I heard that he
Yeah.
died,
Yeah. I was
um,
thinking about doing that too.
I'm doing it chronologically, and it makes better sense. I started
Mhm.
with Racerhead and Elephant Man and so forth. Now I'm up to the second season of Twin Peaks. And other than the Elephant Man and the later film they made in between Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive called The Straight Story, which is a kind of joke, a G-rated David Lynch film. He
Mhm.
did that deliberately.
Yeah.
I get the jokes. I understand Lynch's imagination. But other than those two, every one of his movies is about the invasion of the physical realm by the astral beings, parallel dimensions, and realities that are real. And that's why we have our artists, because they've got antennae that can pick up on those dimensions in ways that the rest of us cannot.
Mhm.
Um, if you read the diaries of Mary Church, when I'm going to republish them, she's got doppelgangers, astral doubles, separating from her physical body, weird spirits following her around. This is all real. She was tuned in to ghosts and spooks and spirits. Bizarre things would happen to her. So that's what we have our artists for,
Mhm.
to make
So I think,
visible the non-visible realities.
right. No, I think what you were saying earlier, what separates sort of rationality from rationalism is moderation, right?
Yeah,
Rational,
it
as
has to
long
know
as it's
its
kept in its
limits.
place.
And that's
Do
all
you,
Gebser's saying, that
yeah.
there are other structures of consciousness that work
Mhm.
just as well as the rational structure. And the
Mhm.
integral structure integrates all 3 of those earlier consciousness structures and relegates each one to its own special zone. So that if you're at a rock concert, and Gebser doesn't say this, but I figured it out. If you're at a rock concert, you're activating the magical consciousness structure, which is tribal and unitary. It unifies tribes and groups together. You're temporarily a tribe of 70,000 people at a U2 concert, let's say. When you go to the movies, you're activating the mythical consciousness structure because that's all about storytelling. That's what it is. That's
Yeah.
a different consciousness than casting spells on someone. It's totally different. And then if you're solving a math problem, you're activating the mental consciousness structure. And if you're realizing this, you're already in the integral consciousness
Yeah.
structure because you can tell which one is appropriate for which situation. That's all Gebser's saying.
Yeah, exactly. But do you think that there are manifestations, like for example, let's take myth. Um, before you were essentially the only person I'd ever heard take myth seriously. So that seems to be a manifestation of rationalism, where rationality as just simply derided mythology where no one takes it that seriously anymore. Like if you bring it up, they'll take the Bible, and I'm not even a Christian, but they don't really recognize it as mythology. And of course, there's that famous Joseph Campbell phrase, mythology is psychology, misread as biography. So they
Right.
take a rational accounting to it, and no wonder we have so many atheists. You're not
Well,
using the right scripture.
a better line from him. Myths are other people's religions.
Mhm.
Those are myths. This is real.
Right.
Christianity, this is real. Those are
Mhm.
Greek myths. Those are just lies, fables,
Mhm.
stories that you tell, in
Fairy
school.
tales, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah. So that, but what myths are true lies.
Hmm.
That's what they are.
Yeah.
When
Yeah, true, yeah.
I watched on Channeling Eric, which is a channel that I watched, I wouldn't be caught dead watching 10 years ago, but that I've grown now. My universe is much larger than it was 10 years ago. But they have a video on there where they used a medium to interview the Jesus person, the individuality who actually physically incarnated as Jesus. And he said 80% of what's in those gospels are lies. They're
Hmm.
not true. I was married to Mary Magdalene. We had children. I was not born from a virgin. My mother was raped by a Roman soldier. I was just a carpenter. I like to travel around and make things. And I incarnated specifically for two reasons. One, to tell people to turn the other cheek, and the other is to reassure them that death is nothing to be afraid of.
Hmm.
That was it. That's the core of it. The rest is mythologizing, true lies. There's truth in there. But like Nietzsche says in Beyond Good and Evil, people need their lies.
Yeah.
And we prefer the lies to the truth. We like the lie much better that Jesus is this God that's incarnated, born from a virgin, can do miracles, exorcise demons. That's a much more entertaining version of Jesus Christ than just some
Yeah.
schmuck wandering around Palestine, fixing people's carpenter problems.
It,
Um,
it,
we like
it,
the
does- it makes sense that they would want that because the
yeah,
sort of nihil I feel like the rationalist truth and where you don't take into account spirituality or mythology or any of that stuff, it engenders a real nihilism, a sort of brutally
yeah.
cold Darwin, once you're done, that's it. How could you ever
The thing
face
about those lies is that myths build civilizations.
yeah.
They make civilization possible. Reason destroys civilization. It does not create. It is a destructive force. That's when you get far left nihilism.
Yep.
And there's two types of liberals. There's the liberal who is an atheist,
Yep.
not Christian, has no beliefs in anything but Marxist materiality, your average French postmodern thinker,
Yep.
for instance. Or the other liberal is the California New Age group that is not Christian, is atheist in the sense that they mean they're non-Christian, but they believe in chakras and astrology and all this stuff that actually really is real. The only problem with it is that it's kitschy, number
Yep.
one, and number two is it's very anti-intellectual. Not always, but usually it regards the intellect as a liability, which it's not. You have to know how to use it and where to apply it, and as you say, what its limits are.
Yeah.
And so my spirituality is basically New Age. I embrace that cosmology, but with a brain.
Right. Yeah. Right.
It's a different
Well,
thing.
that's what Gebser is trying to say. Like the either or thinking of rational thought, it's either rational or irrational, but that's one particular way of viewing it. You can transcend to irrationality, and then
Irrational.
there you
Right.
go.
There's
I'm glad you brought up
truths in being
the
both. Yeah.
destroying the civilization because did you follow this H-1B immigration debate that cost
No, no.
Vivek his?
I try to stay away from politics because
Yeah.
when I was immersed in it for the 3 years after Mary was dead, I was drinking 24/7 and just watching politics, making shitty comments on Twitter. I was a wreck. I no longer.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We
Because it
can
just
move on.
it makes you upset, and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, that is true. The
Problem with
megalopolis.
politics. You get mad, and then you can't do anything except insult your friends on Twitter.
That's fair enough. That's
That's
fair
it.
enough. Well,
So no, go ahead. I'm interested though,
oh, okay.
at least following the what's going on.
So we have the legal, essentially what happened was, so in the same way that there's two kind of factions on the left, there's the more typical, I guess, Bill Clinton liberal who is a capital L, but also a lowercase liberal. And then you have the leftist Marxist kind of thing. You're
Right.
seeing a very similar thing happen on the right, where you have the capital L liberal right, the traditional, but then you have what they call the post right, or they call them the woke right. And this is exactly that. They don't want
Woke, right? Now this is a new one, right?
right. Yes, there's a woke left and a woke right. Yes, it's it's getting ridiculous.
Tell me about this. So what's the woke right?
So the woke right is what the traditional right would call. would deride them as. So they are post-liberal. So they think liberalism is either the cause of the woke left insanity or defenseless to defend it. It was weak in defending it. So they say they want a new political philosophy, but they don't really have anything tangible. It's just everything is we don't like the woke left and we will go against that. But it's hard to build.
It's reactionary then, basically.
No, that's exactly what it is. So in immigration, there was this great debate about are we letting in too many immigrants, and the capital L liberal right would say, well, of course we should let in immigrants. It's obvious. And then you say, well, what makes it obvious? And they point you to an economic chart. And that to me signals rationalism. So we've taken human ontology, which is extraordinarily complex. There's millennia of culture one brings, sign regimes, which maybe you can expand on. There's all these things to consider, and it's reduced them down to what is quantifiably measurable and consciously known. And if you really are this hyper individualist and you believe in this sort of free competition, I guess it does make sense to kind of just not want a border because they might be more productive units after all. They don't have anything qualitatively that they can't measure to balance it. But the sort of woke right does. They're worried about more amorphous things like the health of the country or the nation's soul. So I think it's interesting how these groups are sort of
As far as the border debate goes, all I think of it is in Spenglerian morphological terms. When you get to this point in a civilization, the civilization starts building walls. The Romans build the limes to keep those nasty Germans and Celts out. And same thing with the Great Wall of China. They're trying to keep out the Qin, no, because the Qin barbarians become the Chinese Caesars, but they then turn around and build the wall to keep out the Xiongnu barbarians that are trying to get in. But as Toynbee remarks, those walls are fine, but they're only temporary. The
yeah.
time, he says, time is always on the side of the barbarian. They're going to get in eventually. All the walls are doing is just slowing down the process because there's a transparent osmotic membrane between civilizations where the people that you were contiguous to, their psyche will affect your psyche over time. Gradually, the two will intertwine. And eventually Rome falls, and here comes the Germans, and then we get German emperors for a while, Odoacer and so forth. Then we've got a new civilization. It's a German civilization, Faustian. That's why that's the perfect name for it. Toynbee's name for it is not good. He calls it far Western Christianity.
Right.
Makes the mistake of thinking that Christianity is fundamentally a Western thing, and it's not. You have to bring in Spengler's concept of the pseudomorphosis. It is a false formation. Christianity, Judaism, anything from the Magian worldview, which is the three Abrahamic religions plus Persia with Zoroastrianism and Byzantine Christianity, that's all one civilization there. The world is a cave, and we are a consensus of believers. We Manichaeans all believe this. We Nestorians all believe this. That's the consensus. There's no I there. Christ says, where two or three are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. Why does it have to be two?
Right.
Can it be Martin Luther sitting alone in his study, reforming Christianity by getting rid of the priesthood, who's blocking you with their consensus group mentality? And it's a German version now of Christianity that says spirituality is all about your heart's relationship to God. No priest need apply. It's you alone that matters. That's Faustian Christianity. Luther was trying to create a German version because the Germans are all about the heroic deed. We separate, they were the first, there's a Scandinavian horn from 400 AD that has the first separation of the pronoun from the verb. It says, I, Flegelmir, made this horn. It doesn't say cogito ergo sum. Those are all verbs.
Right.
There's no pronoun in Latin. So the Germans are the first to separate out the deed from the doer who wants the credit for the deed. The Beowulf who brags about all of his dragon slaying adventures, and Roland and so forth, these Siegfried. And this is consequently why Spengler says Faustian literature has the loneliest characters in the history of literature because it's all about one guy. Hamlet, Lear, Othello, Faust, Michael Corleone, Luke Skywalker, all the way down into popular culture. The myth is still going on. That's the West, not Christianity, which is false. It came from another place, another geographical environment in the Middle East a long time ago. It has no relevance to the West whatsoever. It's a dead religion.
That's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned Spengler. Sorry, I was trying to find Gebser offered I guess a critique, if that's what you want to call it, of Spengler, where he said he focused too much on the vital principle when
Yeah,
analyzing history. Can you
that's right.
expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I just realized this the other day that when I was reading Rudiger Safransky's marvelous biography of Heidegger, and he's written several biographies of philosophers that have been translated into German. I've read them all. They're marvelous. He's got one on Nietzsche, one on Schopenhauer. The best one is his book on Goethe, The Life of Goethe. This guy knows how to tell a story in very readable, non-boring prose. And the same thing with Heidegger. He's got one on Holderlin that's never been translated, but probably never will be. That Heidegger's concept, and I said before, because I do revise my thoughts over time. I recognize that the development of the mind is a gradual thing, and changing one's position is healthy,
Mhm.
which is to say that I said Spengler's idea of Dasein and Heidegger's idea of Dasein are two completely different things. That was the position I maintained based on the fact that for Spengler, Dasein means pulse, beat, rhythm. When a flock of birds moves as a single group, how do they all know how to do that? That's the Dasein
Right.
instinctive world that runs your autonomic circulation of your blood and your pulse, the heart. All that is Dasein as opposed to Wachsein, in his case, waking being. Waking being is when you've got a waking consciousness, whether it's animal or human, doesn't matter, that spreads out a world in space, time, and causality around you. So that's the distinction that he makes, and it's a brilliant one. He's transforming Nietzsche's Apollo and Dionysus into biological, vitalistic language because of the influence of Bergson. Spengler had read Creative Evolution, indeed all of Bergson's books, in between the two volumes. And it's in the second volume that he introduces this distinction because he's gotten it from Bergson. And then I thought about Heidegger's Dasein, and I started to realize actually the two concepts are saying the same thing. They're both vitalistic concepts because Heidegger means by Dasein actual lived experience. And this is what he says in his first lecture, which I went over on YouTube the other day in his first lecture, when he says he's critiquing Husserl. He's this pupil superstar, just like Freud and Jung, they have the same relationship. He's supposed to be the superstar of phenomenology. He's going to carry on Husserl's tradition. But Husserl takes what he calls the natural attitude and brackets it and sets it aside. And for him, philosophy consists in creating a mental phase space that's very analytical, very mathematical, in which we extract the essences of consciousness from various acts of noetic perception. Noesis is a perception, but there are several modes of it. Imagination, let's say I'm imagining a tree. That's a noetic state where I'm imagining an object, a noema, as he calls it. So you have a noesis with different states, and noema, they can be single or multiple, and he's analyzing consciousness. So I could perceive the tree, that would be one noesis. I could imagine a tree, that would be another noesis. I could remember a tree. Those are all different noetic states. Because you can do vice versa. You can have one noetic state, let's say imagination, and imagine a bunch of different kinds of noema trees, a whole bunch of them within one state of consciousness. But what he's doing, and he says he's retrieving the transcendental ego, which exists in a complete, like a Cartesian XYZ de-worlded space. And for him, that's where real philosophy goes on. Heidegger comes along and says, let's turn that upside down. The lived, he's giving a lecture at the lectern, he's about 30. He says, let's think about this lectern for a second. In fact, he starts with the lectern, not with theorizing. He starts with the lectern. First paragraphs. He says, I walked into this room and I saw the lectern, and I was a little annoyed that it had a book on it that I didn't want there. But I adjusted and I came up to the lectern, and now I'm here perceiving it. Notice that lived reality comes first. It always comes first. This will later become Dasein, that the world, being in the world means a being in the world. You're in the world. You're not up there in Platonic Vorhandenheit, abstract phase-based like Husserl, and indeed most of philosophy since Plato has created this artificial world. And so he's trying to he's trying to get rid of the distinction between an absolute subject beholding an absolute object and fuse them together and take the transcendental ego and put it back down into the world, the actual world of lived experience in which you always already are there. The mind wakes up, the analytical mind wakes up, it's late on the scene. You are already in a situation, and everyone has, when you look around at the village carpenter, the baker, and so forth, everyone has a pre-philosophical understanding of what it is that they're supposed to do. They can shift into a theoretical mode and analyze it, but that's a different mode of consciousness, and it's a rare mode compared to the life mode, the Dasein mode. So after I read through Safranski's marvelous explanation of this lecture, and then I went and read the lecture, it then occurred to me, the two Dasein ideas are both vitalistic. Absolutely. They both lived concrete reality.
Here's what Gebser says about Spengler. He says, these and similar theories of history appear to have individually only a partial validity. It does not matter whether we speak of a history of nations or peoples, of philosophy or of the soul, for in every instance the visible or invisible, events which in some way determine one another are arranged in one time sequence. As a result, even contemporary political historians frequently make the error of relying on the inevitably power-oriented events, ignore as inconsequential the uneventful periods in which the truly eventful actions occur. Essential to such history are the coronations, abdications, wars, treaties, and revolutions, an extremely one-sided, perspectivistic, and material emphasis. And he says, its approach is appropriately perspectivistic, and in spite of all calculations, it does not take this form of calculation into account. So I think what he's saying is it's too lost in the deficient mode of rationalism. Do you agree with that general?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's his efficient, deficient of each of the consciousness structures. The deficient mode of the magical is black magic, casting negative spells to harm people. The efficient mode is the white magic part of it. The deficient mode of myth is, I think he has something to do with oral storytelling, and then it's efficient mode. I forget that.
I think it's hyper individual myths, hyper
Yeah,
individual.
that's right,
Yeah.
exactly. So, but that's his way of sort of adopting, borrowing Spengler's idea of decline. Only here it's when a consciousness structure such as the rational structure is deficient, when it deems rationality to be the king of everything in existence. That's deficient, but that's essentially what has happened to the perspectival phase of the mental consciousness structure in the 19th century, starting in the 18th century with the age of reason, reason this, reason that. Voltaire, everyone's a rationalist, or if you're a Christian like Lessing, you're a deist, but still a rationalist, and so forth. And it's all disintegrating down. That's what happens when rationalism kicks in. This is Nietzsche's idea of the Socratic man. Socrates represents, and he's the first philosopher to say this, represents a degeneration of philosophy into a merely rationalistic thing that just tears culture forms to pieces by overanalyzing them. And consequently, the plays of Euripides, who was a good friend of him, loses the mystique and the aura that Aeschylus and Sophocles had.
Yeah.
He turns the chorus into a bunch of guys who are analyzing the scenes and telling you why Medea is mad. And so now it's the plays are still good.
Yeah.
And they were hugely popular. 16 or 17 or 18 have survived, whereas only 7 each of Aeschylus and Sophocles have survived. And they both wrote 80 to 90 plays. Boy, would I love to get my hands on those. So that Nietzsche was the first to say this, the first to figure out that there is such a thing as cultural degeneracy. And that's what Spengler borrowed from him and ran with it, that the Socratic man appears on stage. And the first one is Akhenaten, ironically, one of my favorite guys in history, but he's the first nihilist. He's the first one who anathematizes all the Egyptian funerary deities. We're getting rid of the funeral Osiris and Isis. I don't want to hear about them anymore. There's only one power. It's not even a god, really, the Atum. It's just the power of the sun. that's it. And we're on the way to monotheism. Freud is correct about that in Moses
Yeah.
and monotheism.
I'm glad
That's the
you,
first Socratic man right there. He comes on
okay.
stage, and he harmed Egyptian civilization for the 13 years that he had the world's first utopian city at Amarna up and running. He harmed it so badly after they destroyed Amarna and they anathematized him from all the history lists. We're lucky we know about him at all because they tried to wipe him clean. Egypt never recovered. Its culture disintegrated steadily from that point on. It really was badly damaging to the Egyptian world, and it was just prey for plunder of the Greeks, and then later the Persians, and then Islam, and one civilization after the next just uses it as a whore. Rome and with Mark Antony and Cleopatra just using you as a whore.
Yeah. I'm
Because
worried that's what we're going through.
it lost its cultural immune system. It lost it
Yeah.
with Akhenaten's destruction. So that's a classic case, even though I idolize him because of his balls. I mean, this guy had balls. He took on the entire state apparatus.
Yeah.
Once he became pharaoh and had the power of the army, basically, when you're saying you've taken control over the state, you've got the army at your beck and call, and he could tell them to do anything he wanted, just like a Caesar. He was a Caesar, one of the Caesars. The first Caesar was a couple generations back with Tutmosis III, who was the first to go after they expel all the Hyksos, and then he goes into Palestine and completely conquers it all the way up to the Hittites. And the Hittites are so tough that they can't conquer them, so they have to make peace treaties with them. But that's the first Caesar, as far as Spangler is concerned, in the decline of the West. Akhenaten is like 4 generations later, but he's really tearing the culture up. It's an autoimmune disorder. But I
Yeah.
admire his individuality. As the biographer Arthur Beagle, no, it was the guy who wrote James Breasted, who wrote the best history of Egypt ever written in the 1920s, said, with Akhenaten, when you get to the chapter when he starts talking about Akhenaten, with Akhenaten, we have the first individual who ever set foot on the stage of world history. We know this guy's name. He makes an impression. His personality is very clear. There's no one else before him. Gilgamesh we don't know anything much about the historical Gilgamesh, who lived 2600 BC. Akhenaten is 1,000 years later. And the personality of Gilgamesh, as it's constructed in the time of Hammurabi with the Babylonians, the old version, the old Babylonian version, in 1790 BC, by some unknown genius. We don't know the guy's name, although I asked a medium to try to fish it out of the ether, and all I could get was that it's a 2-syllable name. It sounds like Shashank. And I thought, oh, that's interesting because Shashank was a common Egyptian name at the time here. That's interesting. Maybe the author was named Shashank. So anyhow, that's the masterpiece. The later standard version that's more complete isn't as good. It was just put together by a scribe, Sinleki Unini. But he's just a scribe. He's not the genius who perceived the story as a journey through the zodiac, because the previous Gilgamesh Sumerian stories, none of them are connected. There are 6 or 7 of them that have survived, but they're all independent units of each other, telling the legend of this historical king, whoever he was, who built these amazing walls around Uruk. And he was the first one to see, hey, wait a minute here. We could put all of these stories and connect them like beads on a necklace together with the zodiac. And it leaves out 1 or 2 stories because they don't fit. Like one is a battle scene, the battle with Akka. But I rewrote it and put it in my Gilgamesh novel, so that when you read my Gilgamesh novel, it's all my wording, but all the Gilgamesh stories that we know about are in that novel because I arranged them chronologically, and no one else has ever done that. So that's what you'll get from my Gilgamesh novel. One of my students, by the way, I'm really excited by this. I was just talking with him yesterday, who has incredibly good literary taste, although he's a physics and chemistry math guy, but he's reading his way through Nabokov. He's read his way through Joyce. I trust his literary opinion. And he just told me for the first time yesterday, he intends to write a Gilgamesh epic.
Oh, nice.
He's read mine, so he understands that mine is written in poetic prose. It's prose, but it reads like poetry.
Right.
Very much stylistically influenced by McCarthy, and Burroughs as well. Those are probably my 2 most prominent stylistic influences. And I was thrilled. He's like, yeah, I'm going to write a prose version of Gilgamesh, and I want you to send me a list, a bibliography of every book you can remember that was great about Mesopotamia, and I'll read them all. And I said, that's exactly what I did. I got into that mind to such a degree that I could imagine every little detail walking down the streets of that city. Plus, I had an incarnation there anyway, as one of Gilgamesh's female lovers, supposedly, a medium has told me. So that probably lends some vividness to it. But this guy is very literate and erudite, and I can't wait to see what his version of it is. Because see, this is how powerful a myth is. There's no one correct version of a true myth. Because it's a myth, it has all this power that can transmigrate across cultures, across generations, and different generations will recreate it and see it the way that they want to see it. Like if you look back with Gilgamesh, it may have been the most, it was like Star Wars. It may have been the most popular work of literature in that world. There's a Hittite translation. There's a Canaanite translation, the Babylonian translation, the original Sumerian tales, of course. Every civilization of the Middle East had a translation of it. It was enormously famous and influential because of the power of it. It was so powerful that we're still fucking rewriting the thing. That's the power of myths, you see. It has nothing to do with rationality or reason.
I'd rather read that than watch the new Marvel movies, I'll tell you then.
Oh yeah, yes,
All right, I think
absolutely.
we have maybe one or two more questions. I actually want to ask you something about your book. Now, this book is awesome, by the way, for anyone who has, and I'm not saying that to blow
Oh,
smoke.
good. Thank you. Yeah.
I think there was now in this you were talking about how the world isn't flat, you are, and how the internet and Facebook and that flattens us from 3D, fully developed, idiosyncratic peculiarity people into
Yeah.
2D character, kind of like celebrities. And you
Yep.
said, but as we have seen, the nature of Facebook as medium overrides all this, for it transforms such individual subjectivities into two-dimensional trading cards. The individual is absorbed back into the same electrotopic fantasy land occupied by celebrities and therefore ironically becomes a sort of hollow mask of himself. And then you say, but of course, all of this is part of a larger endeavor of our civilization to flatten out depths into surfaces, to crush complexity, ambiguity, and multidimensionality into simplicity and advertising logo simple-mindedness. Television flattens political issues into sound bites. The automobile flattens circles into wastelands. Celebrities are a flattening of the human personality into an icon. Hollywood movies flatten complex stories into formulas and cliches. Books are becoming ever more and more shallow. Casualty wars, caffeine-free coffee, Coke and Pepsi, non-alcoholic beer, all is flattened, simplified, detoxified, and destroyed. And my question to you is, do you think you are noticing a new consciousness structure, or is this something else? And is the internet, in the same way that the book or the Gutenberg galaxy, the media created by the Gutenberg galaxy, was a both a manifestation of and propagation of the mental consciousness structure? Is that what the internet is? Because in
Yeah.
this book you
That's
said,
right. I just hadn't discovered the concept of hypermodernity at
yeah,
that point. And so when I was looking at the new media invasion back in 2011, when I published the book, I wrote it in '09 and 10. Um, I was still dealing with the internet as a negative thing, as an invasive thing, which it initially was and still is. Although I've changed my views a lot about the internet, and it's now my all-time favorite medium because you can do anything with it. It's astonishing.
yeah.
McLuhan said that every new medium, the content of a new medium is always an older medium. The content of the printed book is the illuminated manuscript. The content of the movie is the novel, and so forth. The content of the internet is every previous medium that has ever existed on Earth. So it's the mother of all media. So I see it
That
as
sounds integral.
yeah. What I was about to
Yeah,
say
yeah.
is that hypermodernity sounds a lot to me like a kind of suburb of the integral consciousness structure. It seems very consistent with it. It's just one different zone of it that it's very flexible. Apparently, you can do a lot of bending and shifting and torquing with that consciousness structure. And so I see hypermodernity as bound up with the integral. I think it's still
Okay.
there. It went through
Yeah.
a postmodern phase that was disintegral,
Yes.
but now the hypermodern phase is putting the pieces back together because the integral is so powerful, it's not going to go away. And when I used the medium to interview Gebser, he said, yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
It is still, it's there. It survived postmodern deconstruction, and it will be here for a long time to come.
I think postmodernity, if I'm glad you said that, because if I had Gebser here, there'd be one question I'd ask, it'd be about postmodernity. I think
Yeah.
it's a almost subconscious reaction and rejection of an incipient new consciousness structure. And if integral consciousness structure, as you said, wants to unify and put all the pieces together, postmodernity says there's nothing to put it up. We're going to divide it and sector it so much because now the division and sectoring externally has been turned inwards. If you took Foucault seriously, you quite literally any claim that I make, you would dismiss because it's an imposition of a power knowledge structure. So I'm not going to do that. So it has both. It has the hyper division and it has the privileging of the ego, the individual above all. So I was curious whether it was integral or rational. And I think I
It's
decided it's
integral, yeah.
rational.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Listen, I hate to run, but I
Yeah,
have
no,
a client or the Spangler Reading Group
of
program
course.
in 10 minutes. So I need a restroom break real quick.
Thank you
Uh,
so much
Great
for
questions,
taking this time.
Justin. Those were excellent questions, all of them,
Awesome. Thank you.
as always is the
Yeah.
case with you.
Thank
Uh,
you. If any of your fans are interested, I'm sorry to do such a shameless plug. I started a new
Go ahead.
channel where we go through Gebser. It's called Seeing Through Gebser. It's called Idols of the Cave. That is my channel name. So thank
That's
you
cool.
again, John. I really appreciate it. If you want to do this again, let me know. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, we will do this again. I'll post this onto my YouTube channel as soon as I get a chance. It might be a day or two. So,
You are the best, John. Thank you.
okay, take care, Justin. Be well.
Bye bye.